Hello, today I will be talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre released in 1974. This is one of my personal favorite slashers and was incredibly influential for the slasher films of the 1980s. This film follows a group of friends who go to Texas in order to look for Sally's grandfather's grave because they believe it might have been vandalized. While here, they go to a house that looks like it has been abandoned and is falling apart and like the wallpaper is falling off after being warned not to go here by people at a gas station nearby. After going to this house, Kirk and Pam, two of the people in the group, go to a watering hole and they eventually make their way to a white house where Leatherface and his family of cannibals live. It's here where the murders begin. So, this film is clearly a horror film and contributes a lot to the horror genre. It feels so raw and just nightmare fueled, and is simply one of the most visceral reactions I've ever had to a horror film. This is truly genre defining and influenced many of the tropes that became popular in the slasher genre. Firstly, we can look at the iconography of this film to see it's a horror film. The violence and practical effects in this film are really graphic, especially for its time. Some examples of this include the disturbing scene where Pam gets put on a hook, the one where the grandpa is like sucking Sally's blood and like starts dancing, and all the scenes where Leatherface uses his chainsaw. The audience can clearly see that one of the main points of this film is to be disturbing and as unsettling as possible. The iconography is honestly some of the like most revolting iconography I've seen in a horror film, even though it was made in '74. Like the lampshade made out of human skin, like all the bone structures, and the fact that when Sally's arms were like tied to the chair, they were tied to like severed human arms. We can also look to the slasher villain in this proto slasher. Leatherface is a spine-chilling slasher villain who commits horrendous acts of violence and inspired many of the other villains who came after him, such as Jason and Michael Myers. Honestly, the only thing I really dislike about this film are the character decisions. Um, a lot of the characters in this film make really stupid decisions. I guess this is a necessary evil for the slasher subgenre, however, because this film really helped to popularize that as a trope for other slashers. I also believe one can read this as a film through its campiness, which is often associated with it's an aesthetic associated with queer culture. We can see this from all of the over the top performances, the really exaggerated violence in the film, and the cannibal family themselves, which, even though they're very disturbing, this film also often plays on like normal family dynamics through the approach to showing the dynamic of this family. Like, one example, like even though the scene was still disturbing, the one scene where they tried to like get the grandpa to grab the hammer was like also darkly comedic. Um, One way to we can examine this film based on class concepts is through the inspiration it took from the giallo genre, but more the horror elements of this genre than the murder mystery elements. For example, the graphic violence, the campiness of the characters in the film, the unpredictability of the antagonist, and the really effective psychological elements of the film were clearly, at least partially, inspired by the giallo genre. I will say that this film, however, takes a more realist approach than the giallo genre overall, though. I truly do like most of what this film has to offer, but if I had to pinpoint a few things specifically, the sound in this is some of the most unsettling I have heard in any horror film. The like unpredictable and haunting score combined with the use of nature in the sound design made me really uneasy, and believe complements the realist approach to this film perfectly. From the very start of the film, the sound had me hooked. Even like while the opening credits were playing, the distorted and echoey sounds were like really unsettling for me. I also love the like documentary style approach to this film. I feel like a lot of the time for horror films this is like a hit or miss approach for me, but for this film specifically, I think it worked really well and made the events of the film feel more realistic. Like it kind of reminds me of the approach used in the Blair Witch Project, but I just like it significantly more in this movie than I do the Blair Witch Project. And as stated previously, I think this movie is really scary and made me pretty unsettled. Aspects of the film, such as the realist approach, the sound design, the iconography, and the brutal violence, definitely contributed to this. I would ultimately recommend the Texas Chainsaw Massacre to anyone who is a fan of slasher genres, because this more than likely influenced your favorite slasher flick. Thank you.